Hi, my name is Bashi, and today I'm going to go over valid parentheses. So let's read the problem description and figure out what they want us to do. So given a string called S containing the following characters, we have an open and closing parentheses, open and closing curly bracket, open and closing square brackets. Determine if the input string is valid. An input string is valid if 1. Open brackets must be closed by the same type of bracket. Now you can see here that these are the same type, these are the same type, and these are the same type. So open brackets must be accompanied by a closing bracket, okay? Number 2, open brackets must be closed in the correct order. What does that mean? If I have an opening one here and an opening one here, I have to follow this by a square bracket, right? It must be in the correct order. I can't have a parentheses closing here and then the square one closing here. That would be invalid. They're not in the correct order in this point here. Number 3, every closed bracket has a corresponding open bracket of the same type. So for every closing bracket, there must be an opening type. There can't be just, let's say there was a closing one here. This would be invalid. It needs to have an opening bracket as well, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and look at the examples. So we have open and closing parentheses, this string here. Is that valid? Yes, right? It follows all 3 rules up here, right? It's valid. Example 2. Are they in the correct order? Well, let's see. This opening parentheses is closed by its type. This opening square bracket is closed by its type. And this curly bracket is closed by its type. So yes, this is true. This follows all 3 rules. It is valid. All right, example 3. We have an open parentheses and a closing square bracket. Is this valid? Well, no, right? It breaks rule number 1. For each open bracket, it must be closed by the same type. So this parentheses, there's no closing parentheses, so it's invalid. Also for number 3, every closing bracket must have a corresponding open bracket, right? So if we have this closing, there must be somewhere that exists an opening for that, right? Which there isn't. Okay, so how do we solve this? Well, let me first get rid of everything here and get rid of the background. Okay, so I'm going to be using a dictionary. Now, I'm going to call this my map. And what this is going to do, it's going to map my closers. These are all my closers, right? So I have closing parentheses, a closing square bracket, and a closing curly bracket. And all those are going to map to my openers. Now, notice that my keys map to my values, right? Because that's what a dictionary is. It maps keys to values. Now, one thing that I want you to notice is that all my keys are closers, and that maps to all my openers, which are all my values, right? So another thing I'm going to be using is called a hash set. Okay, I'm going to call this hash set opening. Okay, here I'm going to store my opening brackets, which are parentheses, square brackets, and curly bracket, right? These are all my opening brackets. Okay, and last, I'm going to be using a stack. And to keep it simple, I'm just going to call it stack, okay? Now, at the very beginning, this stack is empty. Okay, so let me write a couple examples up here for you guys. Okay, so I've written some examples here, and let's go over them. So we want to process every single character for the string, right? So we want to start here. We're going to move all the way to reach to the end here, right? We're going to do that for every single string. Okay, so let's go ahead and run through the examples. But before we do that, I want you to know that if it's an opening bracket, we're just going to have to push it into the stack. That's all we do. If it's opening, we just push it onto the stack. That's it. Now, if it's a closing one, then we look at the map. Okay, so let's go over example 1. So our very first one, we have a opening square bracket, right? So, like I said before, if it's opening, we just push it onto the stack. We move on to the next character. Now we have an opening curly. Opening there. Opening, we push it onto the stack. Now we have an opening parentheses. Opening, we just push it onto the stack. Okay, Now we run into a closing parentheses. So if it's a closing type, I want to pop off the stack. So I'm going to pop off this opening parentheses and I'm going to delete it from the stack. So now I have this opening parentheses here, right? So we are currently on this character, right? And we look into the map, right? We look into my map and we say for this character here, right? For this character that I'm currently at, I should pop off the stack. I should have this one. Is that what we popped off over here? Yes. So far it is valid, right? So we move on. So we move on to the next character, right? Which is this closing curly bracket, right? And what do we do with closing? Well, we first pop off the stack, right? So what do we pop off? We pop this one off, right? And let me get rid of that. Then we look into the dictionary, right? We look into the map. We say, hey, for this one here, right? For this closing bracket, which I'm currently at, right? This is my current bracket. I should have popped off this one. Was that the case? Yes, it was. So, still valid. We move on. We hit the last one here, right? Closing square bracket. So, what do? We pop off the stack, right? We pop that off. Okay. And we look into our dictionary and we say, hey, for the current one that I'm at, the current character that I'm at, did I pop off the corresponding opening bracket? And yes, we did. So is this string valid? Now, before we say that this string is valid, we have to look into the stack. We have to say, is it empty? If it's empty, then yes, this string is valid. And it is the case, so it is valid. So I'm going to erase this and move on to example number 2. Okay, example number 2. Now, we first look at the first character. Now remember, if it's an opening bracket, the only thing we do is push it onto the stack. So we'll go ahead and push it onto the stack. And we move on. Now we're here. Opening parentheses. What do we do now? Well, it's opening, so we push it onto the stack. So we move on. Now we're here, right? We're at the very last character. What do we do now? Well, first things first, we pop off the stack, right? We pop this off the stack. And we say, for the current character that I'm on, did I pop off the correct corresponding character? We look here. Yes, we did. So far, so good. Now we reach the end of the string, right? But before we say that this is valid, remember like last time, we have to check here. Is it empty? If it's empty, then the string is valid. But it wasn't empty. That means we're missing the closing one for this, right? So example 2, invalid string. Let's move on to example 3. Example 3, our first character, an opening curly. It's opening, so all we do is just pop it onto the stack. Okay, we move on. We move on to this. It's a closing curly. So what do we do now? We pop off the stack. So what do we pop off? Well, we pop off this one, right? And we look into the dictionary, right? We look into my map. We say, hey, for this one here, do I have a corresponding opener? Well, yes, we do. It checks out, so we move on. Now we move on to this one. We have a closing square bracket. Now it's not an opener, so we pop from the stack. But wait, there's nothing in the stack. The stack is empty. So if the stack is empty, that means we're missing the opener for this guy, right? So this is also invalid, okay? Okay, well, let's go ahead and code this. I'm going to erase this. And I'm going to bring up my code editor, all right? Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create this dictionary right here. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so we're going to need a dictionary. If you look here, the key type is a char. So we'll go ahead and type in char. And also the value is also a char. So we're going to have a char. Now we're going to call it my map. Okay. Now, what is this going to hold? It's going to have my closers to my openers. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, the first one is going to map my closer parentheses to my opening parentheses. As so. My second one, I'm going to go ahead and map my closing curly to my opening curly. And last one, I'm going to map my closing square to my opening square. As so. I forgot a comma right here and a semicolon right here. So this dictionary is this part here. Now we also need a hash set. Let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to need a hash set, right? And what type is this going to hold? Well, this is going to hold chars, right? Characters as well. Up here, we called it opening, so let's call it the same thing, opening. Well, what is this one going to hold? Well, this is going to hold all my openers. So let's go ahead and do that. Just like that, okay? Last but not least, we're going to need a stack, right? So we'll create a stack. And what is this stack going to hold? Well, it's going to hold the characters, right? So we need it to be to hold type char. And we said that we're just going to call it stack, right? Now notice here, this is lowercase and this is uppercase. So we're just calling it stack. All right. Now we said that we were going to go through every character of the string. So for each character, we'll call it starter in S, right? So we're going to go through every single character that's in the string S, right? And that character, we're calling it starter. Now we're going to say if, remember, if it's an opener, right? So how do we check to see if it's an opener? Well, we'll see if the current starter is an opening. So if opening contains the starter, right? That means it's an opening, right? So that means it's in the hash set. So what do we do now? The thing to do, right? Like I mentioned before, if it's an opener, all we have to do is push it into the stack. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll push it into the stack, right? Just like this, we have the opening and we're pushing it into the stack. Else, it's a closer, right? If it's not an opener, then it's a closer. So what do? Well, we pop from the stack, right? So first we have to check to see if the stack is empty, right? So if it's empty, that means it's an invalid string, right? So we return false because it's empty, right? We can't pop anything off, so it's an invalid string, right? Either it's empty or the thing that we popped off, right? So let's go ahead and pop from the stack. The thing that we're popping off does not equal what's in my map, right? If we look in my map, if it doesn't equal what's in my map, right? So we have to look in my map, right? And we give it the character that we're currently on, right? So we're gonna look in my map, right? And this is gonna give us a value, right? So we're gonna input the key of whatever here, and it's gonna give us a value. So let's say we inputted this, right? We inputted the closing square bracket. It's gonna give us a value of opening square bracket, right? So this is what we currently have. And we're gonna say, hey, does this match whatever we popped off, right? Look here, right? So we go in, we put in the key, and we get a value. So this returns the value. If that value does not match what we just popped off, then that's also an invalid string. So we also return false, right? Now, let's say we got past all this, right? Either the stack at the very end is going to be empty. If it's empty, then we have a valid string. But if there's something left over in the stack, remember, like in our example, then that means it's invalid. Now we want to return true if the stack is empty, or false if the stack is not empty. So return stack.count, right? So if the stack is empty, that means it's 0, right? So that means this is going to evaluate to true. So if it's empty, that means we have a valid string, so return true. If it had some characters, then that string is invalid, right? So we want to return false, right? So this will guarantee true for an empty string, otherwise false, right? And with that, we're done. So let's go ahead, bring back LeetCode. All right, let's go ahead and paste our solution in here. We're gonna go ahead and run to see if we made any errors. So let's go ahead and submit it. Okay, so we passed all cases. Now let's do the same for Python. All right, so I'm gonna come up here, go to Python, get rid of this, paste the equivalent for Python, right? So let's look at it. So we have the map, right? My map, closers to openers. We have the openers, right? Which is the hash set. We also have the stack, right? So we're gonna go for each character in the string, right? If it's an opener, then we push it into the stack. Else, it means it's a closer. So we check to see if the stack is empty, or if what we popped off doesn't equal what's in our map, right? If we have an invalid character, if they don't match up, then we return false. At the very end, we check to see if the stack is empty. If it's empty, return true. If it's not empty, then it returns false. So let's go ahead and run that. Check the test cases first. Okay, no errors. Let's go ahead and submit. And you can see that it passes all cases as well. And that is my walkthrough for valid parentheses. If you found the video helpful, hit the like button. If you have any questions or suggestions, go ahead and leave a comment. And that's pretty much it. And thank you for your time.